it was actually more developing this inner feminine. If he was developing his masculine king, he was also interested in a process he called calling for the queen, which really was calling for elements of his own divine feminine to integrate within the masculine, so he would eventually become a whole being. And this was really probably what this 12-year period was mostly about, would be the development of the divine feminine within him. So when in Course in Miracles it talked about mighty companions, you could see that there was this development of the relationship with me, the Sun King, and of course I'm probably overall the guiding force in his life, but he was calling also for the queen. Okay, so or perhaps in the Chinese astrology, Louis was born under the sign of the dragon, and actually the water dragon. So it could be that you could say that if the Sun King was representative of this higher masculine, that water dragon was representative of his higher feminine. And that, balancing the energies of both of these would be what would ultimately bring him into his wholeness. There was a quote that I wanted to share. Louis had received from a brief spiritual partner in his journey way back in 1975. This woman, Helene Hartley, shared with him. She gave him this card, sent him this card, and it just said, "When the world wearies and ceases to satisfy, there is always the garden." And this would become a very dominant theme now as Louis literally developed this garden. But it represented his learning thus far that the world, as it was not satisfying to Louis, was not interesting. He didn't really ever enjoy any of his sort of worldly accomplishments. And even now, as a business kind of developed around his divine feminine, his soul desire for the garden, the masculine expression of that in the form of a business, the worldly accomplishment, was not satisfying. In fact, as the business grew to the point where at one point Louis had 6 young employees and had his biggest year ever as far as income, it was not satisfying at all. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to share about Louis was during his time, during his marriage and as part of the period of settling down, Louis started to experience a number of manifestations in his body, illnesses, disharmony in his body, particularly in the heart center. Okay, and it expresses itself mostly in the form of acid reflux. But for any of you that understand what acid reflux, what the experience of that is like, it's very much when you have an acute acid reflux attack, it feels pretty much the same as a heart attack. And in fact, if you were calling, as it happened in Louis' case on a few occasions, emergency and talking with someone on the phone describing symptoms, which could well be acid reflux, they generally have you come into the hospital to make sure it's not a heart attack. So this happened on several occasions. Louis was in the emergency room several times with what could be a heart attack. And of course, it never was. It was acid reflux. But it was one of those things where Louis had to understand that as he was becoming more sensitive, okay, he's broken down this egoic shield that would be all about denial and projection, and allowing his body to feel. okay? So, not just the top-down divine, all of these high-level euphoric feelings, but becoming connected to the earth, the feminine, and starting to feel in his lower chakras. And of course, where the upper chakras and lower chakras meet is in the heart center, but feeling pain, feeling suffering, feeling dis-ease. And so this was a key part of the, what had been this period of relinquishment, but learning to actually feel and assess what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what's, this is again a big part of this development of trust, okay? That Louis would come to trust, as he did already, the higher influence of me, Sun King, but he would also beginning to learn to trust his own soul, his own feminine connection with the earth, and trust these feelings of pain, of suffering, of disharmony, of upset, that these would help him make choices as he would move forward. Again, to walk in the world as a whole being, okay, 1 foot in eternity, 1 foot connected to what I represent, but also 1 foot in the earth, connected to the elements, connected to the body and its feelings. Because, the body, it often will be a good litmus test, a good harbinger of other things that's going on. Typically, the manifestation of any illness, any disease, any injury is always a pointer to a disharmony at a deeper level, okay? The body is just a manifestation of deeper states of emotional, mental, and of course, the spiritual component. So basically what you could say is that as the spiritual level of knowledge increases, so does the manifestation in the mental, emotional, and physical body. Okay, the person in the body. Very important, again, to see the body as a useful device, okay, to see the person as a useful device. If this is the communication device that I'm grooming, okay, for my purpose, Sun King's purpose, which is very high level expression of the divine, of the unmanifested, the body and the person need to find a way to be as little problem as possible. So it behooves this function to have the body and the person create as little interference pattern as possible. Okay, so stuff is manifesting, okay? Louis' body had to deal with some carcinoma, had to deal with the appearance of a heart attack. In fact, I'll get to this later with the Montana story, but in 2002, just before Louis turned 50, he supposedly experienced a massive heart attack in Montana. Turns out it was not a heart attack at all. But this is what's interesting is that, again, the body is going to express more and more finely, more and more, with more and more clarity, it's going to express the disharmony, which points to choices necessary. Like, for example, in 2001, when the World Trade Center thing happened, Louis had this experience as he watched on television the second plane going into the tower, and he knew in his body, he knew in his person, his mental, emotional person, he knew that that was it, that he had to leave the USA, that he felt the disharmony between his soul, between his spiritual purpose, and elements of the culture in the USA. So this began a process of, again, choosing to disconnect from those things that brought him sense of disharmony, discomfort, okay, pain, emotional, physical pain, suffering, the marriage, the same thing. realized that not only did he need to leave USA, but he needed to leave the marriage, he needed to leave the business, he needed to leave all of that. Okay, this is what this period of settling down and then eventually sorting out was for. Okay, to really discern from a place of quiet, from a place of connection to feeling, really discern what works, what serves my, Sun King, what serves my mission of service and what doesn't. Okay, the body and the person would experience levels of disharmony, of suffering that would then allow it to choose again, choose something different. Okay, so again, during this 12-year period from 1993 to 2005, Louis would choose to leave USA, leave his marriage, leave Minnesota, leave his company, leave his life as it was. Like this whole expression of what would appear to be a successful career was actually there to show him that does not satisfy. The successful career, the successful marriage, that was not the point. That was not what his higher function was about. Okay, at least not there at that time and place in Minnesota. So very fascinating process, and I'll share in our next segment about the Montana part of this, because these are, there was the feminine development of the garden, the masculine expression of the king, next section we'll call the king's blessing. Okay, so king and queen, masculine, feminine, coming into balance, coming into wholeness. This is the journey. This is what all of you are called to do. If you're really on the path, you're going to have the call to have these different elements come into your experience so that you will become whole. Okay, only a whole being really serves as a magnificent portal, channel, conduit through which I, the divine, can enter the world. Okay, again, without, ideally there needs to be this way in which the life becomes so complete, whole, that there's no interference patterns. There's no longer any yearning for, unfinished business. There's no longer any karmic necessity to anything. Okay, then the being becomes truly useful. So that's all for today. Sun King sends great blessings. Listen, pay attention.